So for me, the ability to hold universal love, unconditional universal love, without the need to be liked or disliked is a vital attribute of leadership today. I don't need to be liked, but I need to be trusted. So to me, it's a choice in life with my friends, with my clients, as a politician, as a teacher.
Welcome back to Integral Voices, convened and produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. I'm Aftab Omer, and I'm glad to be in conversation with Monica Sharma on today's episode, Trust, Fractals, and Learning, exploring the practice of transformative leadership. This episode is from a heartful conversation I enjoyed with Monica Sharma in the context of her presence as contributing faculty in a course entitled Igniting Collective Imagination, Transformative Leadership for Teams, Organizations, and Communities in a Time of Crisis, held at Meridian University. Monica Sharma is a physician and epidemiologist who spent 22 years at the United Nations focusing on developing leaders in many countries around the world. Her book, Radical Transformative Leadership, admired by authors like Peter Senge and Daniel Goleman, offers a coherent model for practitioners of transformative leadership. In the midst of the interlocking and cascading crises that people around the world are enduring, Monica's work is of critical importance. Integral Voices is a video and audio podcast found on all podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. To stay updated on upcoming episodes and to explore the archive, visit meridianuniversity.edu/Integral Voices. Now, on to my conversation with Monica Sharma. You know, as a person, I experienced Monica Sharma in a way as this combination of fierceness and compassion.
Oh, Aftab, thank you. Thank you so much. We cannot end racism if we cannot create a post-privileged world. So we need to move from privileged groups to a post-privileged world. If you can hold the word from as a systems shift construct, a way to shift culture. So when we say from to, we are very, very specific. Why are we specific? We want to measure the change we bring instead of assuming that whatever we do creates that change. In order to measure, I need to be specific. So one of the things in ending racism is it's not just ending racism, because the mindset that exploits caste or class or age or anything is the same need to dominate. And it comes from a very primitive space in us. You learn all that, you teach that most probably. So for me, if you can hold with in one space and from in another, then we can design for making the difference. So from means my ability to shift culture from diminishing practices like the Ethiopian woman did to practices that are life enhancing. So it's from there to there. So people get that there is a shift that is in the middle circle. It's not a withdrawal. When we say width, we have a very particular interpretation of that word. And that word requires a lot of interpretation, particularly with the language on collective impact and stuff like that. So for us, width is the ability to stand alone, whether anybody comes with you or not, but never go it alone, means always with someone else. So width has a very strong leg for us. It's not a together, let's do whatever. No, if somebody says, sorry, I don't believe in equality of women, are you going to stand there and say, I'm with you? No, you don't have to attack them, but I have to speak truth to power, no, like you said. So as long as width is a strong space, and as long as width isn't, I agree because it's the popular thing to do. So in leadership, I think Harvard Business Review did a study 30 years ago when I was entering a space, and they said you have to make a choice in life. Do you want to be popular or do you want to be trusted? So trust is integrity and popularity is playing to the gallery. As long as your width is not popular opinion, that all people are equal, and some say no, and you're with a group that says no, do you stand up? So for me, do you realize that we are running a social media culture that's populist? Let's just today. So everything is like, dislike. So, I mean, it's not about, does it matter to anybody? Like, dislike. So we've perpetuated in marketing, in consumerism, in actually even the daily relationships that we have, it's about like and dislike. So you teach, Melissa, that how do you have a choice to like and dislike, which is a preference, which is how the US is responding to masks. I don't like, I like. Not does it matter. So I like, I don't like. I do that even at home. So basically in my relationships, I'm stuck in that side of me. And so as long as I am not bound by popularity, and there is where democracy needs to mature, because it is the vote. And to me, trust doesn't mean you like the person. So you can love humanity, you may not like somebody. You may not like working in a particular place because it's so harsh and it's so, let's say, anti-women, right? So there is stamina required to work in those places, and you may wish to work for a short while. So yes, but I work out of integrity, not out of like, dislike, and prejudice. Trust is a very profound space for me. I mean, and of course, trust will be betrayed. No? Because trust is connected to expectations. When do we say you've broken my trust? Is I had an expectation and I didn't meet it. And some of those betrayals are profound and some of them are superficial. Like you've watched these little ones, like young ones, little kids. And so little kids is, I don't like you anymore because you're that person's best friend. But you were my best friend. If you love me, you won't be with that person. Yeah, it carries on. I mean, very young. So for me, the ability to hold universal love, unconditional universal love, without the need to be liked or disliked, is a vital attribute of leadership today. I don't need to be liked, but I need to be trusted. So to me, it's a choice in life with my friends, with my clients, as a politician, as a teacher. As a teacher, do I wish to be liked as a mother or a father or a parent? I mean, do I not guide my children? Do you think my kids were clapping when some of the disciplinary boundaries we put in our home? No, they were not clapping. So basically that ability to shape beyond like, dislike. And in fact, a lot of the studies around, teenage pregnancy, the need in some cultures to have boyfriend, girlfriend. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I mean, all of you are young people. Please go ahead, have any friend, any gender. But the issue is when you pressurize kids, you're not okay because you don't have 24 girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever that. Now it's all about, many, many. So that's another thing we've created. Not only like, dislike. I am better if I have 35,000 likes than you who have only 29,000 likes. Since when?
Monica, this brings up the a question about cultural viruses. So here we are in a pandemic caused by a biological virus. But do you relate to this idea of cultural viruses?
I've never heard it before, but if you say it's a wise idea, I agree, and then I'll say what. So by virus, you mean something that kills or something that inhabits? Or is it very much like that point on decolonizing the mind? Is that what you mean?
It's for sure related, and Kindy had also brought up in chat earlier about how do I decolonize my mind. So basically, the idea is I am not my thoughts. That's a deep truth about the relationship between who we are as persons and thoughts, and that there is a phenomenon of infection through which cultural memes, or when we mean it in a negative way, we can call it as cultural.
You're talking about cultural memes, and okay, got it.
And that these are infectious, and cultures can be in a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle in terms of what memes are taking hold. And now we have social media, which can intensify either. So I can't breathe became a meme, a virtuous cycle meme. And then there are...
for me, you bring up, and so did Kindy, bring up something that is related to her third point. In fact, it's related to her second point. So I hold this space not as either or, you see, because for me, there's a big difference in a culture that locates itself with positive, negative, which is what's taught in management and that kind of leadership. So it's always polarized language, so there's a meme that's infectious and there's a meme that's great, or one is a virus and it's not. And whenever we have language and thought that is that way, I believe that we cannot express our full inner space because we are our thoughts in a different way. We are not that, we are beyond that. So the way I have worked on decolonizing my mind, and in the work that we do, we have certain distinctions we work with in our courses with our participants, because all of us, we know, have been colonized in some way or the other. And how do we hold science without making it scientific materialism? How do we hold consciousness without, making it a business? So for me, I have used 3 approaches. The first approach is I distinguish mind from our whole self. So to make it easy, when I was working in JFK with Vernice, she would put 5 points. In Oroville, they have 4 points. They say, we are body, we are emotion, we are mind, and then some of us say we are soul or spirit or consciousness or whatever. So let's assume it's this 4. And then, of course, Sri Aurobindo has another layer to it, but let's take this. So for me, there's a difference between body, emotion, mind, which is a continuum, and the spirit, and the way we've entered a knowing of the space, because you can't understand the space, a knowing of the space is to be able to look at how our mind is influenced through emotions in the past, triggers from the past, how our body picks up these spaces. And it's, Vipassana meditation is based on being able to notice, name, and let go without judgment. And then there is the space of our ideological self, or the ideologies that were taught to us through our childhood and through teachers in school and in college and in university. So then I am informing these three spaces by what we call our upbringing or our socialization. How can I learn to rest in my greatness and be able to work in the now with beginner's mind? That's the only way I can decolonize my own mind. Then I was reading a book, which all of you must have read, Specialized Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman. And the neuroscience says, you meditate even 10 minutes a day, and you start altering your capacity to unfold. There is a second thing that I have used, because somehow, no matter how wise we are, if we don't have a big label behind us, like it sometimes doesn't land on anyone. So I was quoting Donella Meadows, who I really admire. And she passed away, and she has identified a thing called ways to intervene in a system. Now, to me, system and culture are used synonymously in most countries. That culture is a system of its own, and system is the formal side. So culture is fine for me, whichever way you do it. For some people, culture is a subset. For some people, system is a subset. And I want to clarify that, because in law, for example, how a nation or a community hold the law will influence how law is created and then how law is implemented. So, for example, my colleague Khadija, who's in the book, she is working with different countries in the Middle East where in their constitution, women do not have the same rights. She's a Tunisian human rights activist, done all this work. I quoted her in the book. And she is working at the highest levels to change those constitutions to make them equal. Now, that's because she and a few judges have felt we need to open that space up. So there's something happening in culture that's influencing the system, and then it'll be back again. So when we work on looking at this cultural shift, we will begin with the leverage points of a system that Donella wrote about so clearly. And she wrote about 12 steps, and she put them in the ascending order of how it works. And for her, she didn't quite write it that way because she was writing for MIT and the Club of Rome. But what for her is the worldview born from who I am. There's a worldview that's born from who I am. And I am not attached to my opinion. I don't fight for it. I'm able to engage in non-polarizing activism. So basically, she said the most powerful place to intervene, that was her first point, is actually the worldview that's born from that space. And it's when she put goals and the ability to change goals, it's a very, very simple thing. So that's the basis of our work. We will use the individual commitment to universal. So we distinguish universal from collective. So universal means it applies to everybody everywhere, whether I like them or not. And so it's like a human rights concept, universal values. So I treat everyone with dignity. And when I can rest in that space, which is what we cultivate in chapter 5, then I can create new norms, which is in chapter 6. So I can give you a lot of examples, both from formal systems of law, governance, corporate law, patenting law, and stuff like that. For example, why is it that the US accepts debt as an inevitable mechanism for life to exist? And that's into education, into health, into housing, into just everything in life. And then it's being pushed down. So microfinance is pushed down. To me, this is a very important part of culture. How we use metrics to blind people. And so we will choose our own metrics and not change the culture. And then Kindi used the word belief. And so for me, I love Charlotte Roberts' quote on that. And somehow I took it out today because I felt maybe, that would be appropriate. And she was from that same, systems group in MIT. And she says, and I'll just quote the first, and I'll say it quickly. In the end, the premise that our cultures are a product of our thinking and speaking is liberating. These barriers didn't appear on the landscape like natural formations, like mountains and rivers. They were created by people's wishes, expectations, beliefs, and habits. So a belief for me is a mind function born out of a culture, very much like she says. They remain in place because they are reinforced and never challenged. And eventually they become invisible because they are taken for granted. So this process of culture has been made so complex through, and rightly through scholars, that the average person doesn't see it. So one of the things I know, I need to demystify these profound constructs so that everyday people can work, which is why we have the conscious full spectrum approach, because your question is a middle circle question. What is in the mind? What's in our mindset? Our collective, individual and collective mindset that you call the collective virus. So for me, memes, beliefs, whether they are life enhancing or not, lie in that middle circle. In that outer circle, Aftab, that you and Melissa, and indeed your university, Meridian, university in your language, which so attracts me, is about the journey of life and unfolding. And to me, that is not a meme, and that is not a virus. That is the space to be.
One of the ways I think about you and your work is in the frame of cultural leadership as a particular type or dimension of leadership. And that this has to do with, in my mind, with this interface partly, where we find a way to go beyond the law, where the law is failing life. And I don't think I need to say more. Back to you, Monica.
Thank you. So I'll thread these three dimensions together because I think Nancy and policy, Elsie and people's movement, and Aftab, your point on interface. So the big change wherever I have practically worked is to situate myself in universal values. So I will look at maternal mortality reduction to respond to Nancy's point, so that we have a real life example rather than the theory of change, but the theory and practice. And I will talk about people's movement, and I'll talk about the interface. So for me, culture and systems sit with me depending on which group I'm speaking to. So I want to create a backdrop understanding. So for me, when I work with Jean, for example, her entry point is culture. But when I work with National Park Services, their entry point is science. It doesn't matter to me what the entry point is. Because, when you look at synergistic operational strategies in real life, people enter the space from different learnings. And one of the reasons that we have this metaframe is that it is able to hold different disciplines. What is the most vital element? What are my universal values? So once I can anchor myself in that space, then I come to the point that Elsie made. The courts and government don't change wide enough because the people are connected through social media in a way they were never connected before. So the pressure points for change are different. They are not identical. I mean, it's one of the things that the business school study brought up. So for me, it's not whether people are moving fast enough. To me, the question is, when people move, do they do it as an oppositional, prior to now social movement, or can they be oppositional and yet not from a destructive anger place? So for me, the big issue related to Elsie's point on law, people, and policy is how we can actually use the same foundation and a similar core processes for the entire group. So let's take maternal mortality reduction as a practical point. So for me, Aftab, cultural leadership is synonymous with whatever leadership, scientific leadership, depending on where I am, or management leadership. So I don't, in my brain, I'm so much on the ground that it's okay however you call it, you see? Because the beauty of Meridian is that you are giving students a wide range of perspectives and theories so that they can move. So I go back to Nancy's point. How do we create enough knowing and the loops that are required for people to move, for policy to be formulated, and for it to be law, and then law implemented, not law like, so I'll give you some negative spaces. So what we know from the data of World Bank is that it's not just education of women that matters. Apparently in cultures where women are beat up, I mean regularly physically beaten up, and it's culturally accepted, then they are beaten more during pregnancy. So when I worked in the early 90s, late 90s, during the 90s, at that time, and still, South Asia has 40% of the world's maternal death and 20% of the population of the world. So it's much higher. And it's one region where 7% of deaths occurred due to beating up during pregnancy. So now you can say, oh no, it happens worldwide. In homes where, like in COVID times, the violence rates have doubled in the US and elsewhere, where women already had to go through it. So to me, creating the awareness, Nancy, has become in a way easier today because of social media. So let's say I'm following a group that says that's about ending violence against women, COVID times and beyond. So that would be, to me, how do I skillfully use enough media to be able to ask the right questions? So then how did I know you will ask me this question, Nancy? So I actually have a quotation from Einstein that says, to raise a new question, to raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks a real advance in science. So we will stimulate that inquiry rather than give all the questions to people. That's what we did during our maternal mortality program, reduction program in the 9 countries of South Asia. And we could see the difference in culture, but we could see that in very male-dominated spaces, we could shift the conversation through tapping into people's greatness together, not ideologically. So how do you tap into this space? Simple, simple. We had a program, community conversations, that were about me at my best and what I stand for, and the courage to speak up in community. Because very often when progressive policies are made, community does not follow. Like when India had a policy against corporal punishment in school, the parents came and said, I was beaten up by my father, what's wrong? Oh, you think I'm not okay? So I need to cultivate those spaces, not as sequential spaces, as a simultaneous multi-level spaces of people, policymakers, and then support lawmaking in a way that actually, moves. I know that we worked with the community with a smaller package of the same thing. We worked with government structures and the experts, because experts intervene, think tanks. They are not always do tanks. They like to be think tanks. And so we needed to bridge that gap of think tanks, because there's a difference between learning at the doorstep of action and learning based on ideological stances. So we actually, built a bridge and deepened that space. So whether I'm a policymaker or I'm a lawyer, or I am a person who is part of the community, I engage through a inquiry, insight, and practice based on universal values. And then one country said, we don't have any problem with human rights. I said, okay, then we don't work if we have no problem with women's rights, because this work is about agency. And if it's no problem, no worries, we are gone. Then my all-time hero, Sher Shah, he stood up and said, what are we talking about in our hospitals? Why is it so hard to be truthful for the spaces we belong, rather than always asking questions to outsiders? So we approach this more as a space of demystifying planning so that everyone can work, bringing together the best science and the best of people so that there is energy to move. It's delightful when we work on the ground. Yeah. And with the Council of Ministers, same place. So I'll end with a small point. We're working in one of the countries, and I leave them unnamed because whenever I name countries, then people think, oh, they are so horrid out there. So in one of the countries, we started our work, and the minister said, we don't sit with everybody like that. We sit on chairs, they sit on the floor. So we said, very, very fine. Well, we can all sit on the floor or all sit on the chair, and maybe we all stand, because, we have a problem where to sit. And by the time you stand for a while, of course you want to sit. And after the first piece of really knowing the greatness of people, irrespective of class, irrespective in one of the countries when we were working on HIV, irrespective of, I'm a minister and I will not work with commercial sex workers in the room, because they are bad, no? So very good. Then you want to sit on separate tables, will not sit at the same table. Never mind where we go in the evening, that's another matter. But by a couple of hours, they were all together. And genuinely, without reorganizing them, that grit, that is vital, no, in this kind of work, for culture to shift.
Monica, if we could go next to how the term fractals, the phenomenon of fractals comes into your approach, your practice, your praxis. And then perhaps after that, we could focus in on the education of practitioners. Um, there are great theorists and there are great practitioners, and we mostly don't get to meet the great practitioners. I think you are one of them. And you are, and a lot of your attention right now is in educating practitioners. So that's where at least my mind is going, and back to you.
Fractal is a construct of nature. It simply means, and it's used in mathematics, it simply means a pattern that repeats itself. I believe the next social movement is going to hold emergence with two arms, what we spoke about. So the fractal has a pattern. So snowflakes are like fractals, right? So because they have a pattern that repeats itself. So a fern, a leaf, is a fractal. Each part is a fractal of the whole. So the big leaf looks like the little ones that look the littler ones and look like the littler ones. It's not a hologram. It's a pattern that repeats itself. In this work, because we want to level the playing field and create a post-privileged world, we are very clear that we work with every human being with that openness to learn ourselves and an openness for others to learn. That fractal has three components. It has a component which says, who am I as a gift for this world, my greatness, my universal values? And we are very clear that's not the position. And we are very clear we don't need to brag. It's about who I am as essence. And I know it's a wordless space, but that's the part of the fractal. Then the next part of the pattern is, what is my mindset like? How do I think? And am I able to influence my thoughts from who I am with that freshness of being in the now? Then the fractal is one thing more. It's not good enough to be a think tank. I need to be a do tank kind of thing. I need to do something. So doing includes speaking. It includes doing at home and in my workplace and in society, because how I lead at home influences how my children will grow, or my family, or how I relate to my family, however. So the fractal is this piece. So in the book, there's a place called scale. And the piece that I know everybody wants to naturally work at scale. So we have some classical ways of working at scale. So the classic ways, and it's in the book, it's like McDonald's or like Target or like Starbucks or like any store. So there is something standard, there's a financing mechanism behind it, and we repeat it. Is that good or bad? I have no opinion on good or bad. Is for me, is that group sensitive to the environment? Is it sensitive to human labor? Is it conscious of things? You know, those are the questions we all ask. So it doesn't matter that I have a standardized product. Then we have another way, and that's education, right? So let's take education. And so you are a university. Everybody who comes to you has done an undergraduate degree, am I correct? But not everybody with the undergraduate degree goes to a university. But everybody who's got an undergraduate degree in our system goes to school, whether it is homeschooling or then there's some process. So what we say is health, law, education. We scale by a pyramid of technologies. So what's taught in school in math is different from what is taught in college in math, is different from somebody who does a specialization in math. And so for me, the ability to hold the greater depth of knowledge and apply it differently, we need a pyramid, because if you had a university in every village, we would not make it, right? And then because of that. So health is like that. There are clinics, then there are hospitals, and then there are specialized hospitals, and then there are those one hospitals in the country that do that very specialized thing. That happens rarely. So it's very related to frequency of engagement. Similarly with law, there are many more courts at local level, and then you have, pyramid. That's the second type. So either you're like Starbucks or you're like education. There's a third type, and that's introduced by social media. And that is not about, the mistaken thing is you can share information on social media, and you can maybe, rev up people to go and have a social movement. But that is very different from the way we scale up. We don't scale up primarily in the social media. We will only bring up things that are, and we call it lend your voice. It's like, violent. We will bring up socially relevant issues for that space. But this is a different way of scaling up. There is no big project, no small project. It doesn't have to be a work-related project. So suddenly you have the basis of a different movement through a fractal that's about universal values, about the ability to activate my mind and do something, which, by the way, is not based on education, and to do something. Because the data shows we are born with a pattern mind. That's why women who have no formal education can still give you a cultural dimension of their life and the system they operate in. So for me, women, men, or people of any gender, so what I need to get is that this pattern needs to be simple enough and not expertise driven always, so that people can be actually working on this, which is why we have made the difference we've made. And so for me, the fact that today people in Iraq who are working with children who have no nationality because of what happened and how women were impregnated by force, they are working with the same tools they learned for HIV and AIDS, because this is subject agnostic. So that's why you can go to scale. You cannot go to scale if there's too much theory that everybody needs to understand in a cross-cultural way. I need to be able to work. And the good news, Aftab, is that I've worked now 25 years in different cultures around the world, from the Prime Minister's office to grassroots workers, to homes, to people in their home, and with people who are committed, like the students you have. Now about practitioner coach. I'm very clear that there are several challenges. So when I work with institutions like the UN, the biggest challenge is that learning is deposited in the HR division, human resource division, and the rest of the people are just supposed to program and implement. And one of the things I did in my stint at the UN was to actually create platforms for this formal thing to dissolve. And I still continue to do that with bureaucracies, because whether all of us have HR departments and we feel learning occurs only there, you have that advantage that you don't operate that way. But you have a disadvantage that the UN does not have. And I don't mean you particularly, I mean academia. I'm not talking about Meridian University. Is that most of the analysis and books by brilliant scholars are based on observing phenomena of how others lead. And there'll be snippets of stories, but they themselves have never had to struggle with their ego on the ground and have their nose rubbed when you want to make change. So you see, some of the nuances that people don't come up with, hard to get. So academia remains largely a space where people have brilliant theories, invent new things, but it's not practice of unfolding my deepest self. And so for me, how can anybody unfold the deepest self if they're not with people, like Indy said? And then practice. I'm very clear how I will work with people for practice. So the first thing is they not need to be committed to a result. And they need to have demonstrated capacity to work on a result. And I know a lot of people say, who am I to commit? Well, if I don't commit with a full belly and a roof over my head, you want the hungry person whose child has just died to commit, is it? So I'm very clear, commitment is not force. Commitment is a calling where I will do what I'm committed to do. So practice, for me, that is the first part of practice, developing coaches. So I need to commit to something and be willing not to achieve it, but I will always accomplish, whether I achieve that or not. The issue is we are born with that till we are socialized into fear that what if we fail? What will people say? So commitment to results. Second, have to participate in a 30, you want to actually be a coach, then I need you to participate in a stage 1 program at least twice. Then we will on the ground, as we do the next stage 1, you will support us. So let me give you an example. So Megan, whom you've heard me speak about, or Sudarshan, they've worked with me over 10, some people 15 years, and they still come in, right? The issue we want to put first is practice, not coaching. So they all have large-scale projects, because we have no right to go and say, do this and it'll work if I am not struggling with it. So they all have a project, they all learn, they all then contribute to the learning, and we will adapt depending on what it is. And then in this work, a practitioner coach is first and foremost a karma yogi, devoted to service, not like some models say, only when you get enlightened you serve. So that's the kind of people we want to work with, the ones who want to serve.
So let's close with some words from Rabindranath Tagore, which I just put into chat. Not only does Monica know these words, she has lived them. And they say, so this is in honor of you, Monica. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Thanks for joining us. Integral Voices is produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. All episodes are available at meridianuniversity.edu/integral voices. For more information about Meridian, including upcoming public courses, other podcasts, and information sessions, visit meridianuniversity.edu. See you next time.